both of you, tell me a little bit about your paths into education. What drove you to schools? What gets you passionate about working with kids?
Well, I'll start. I always wanted to work with kids. I mean, when I was in high school, I thought I wanted to teach and coach, and I never varied from that. I didn't go through, I think I'll major in this or I'll major in that. It was always education. And once I was lucky enough to get a job, it just seemed to me that every year I got more passionate about working with kids, working for kids. Knowing that you are making a difference in kids' lives has always been important to me. So I was very lucky in my time to be doing something that I thoroughly enjoyed. Dr. Steach, I know you have a different path than
Yeah, I took a completely different path. I actually started off in engineering and operations management.
Yeah.
I had 2 years in a chemical plant in LA and 17 years on the Hanford side as an operations manager. And it wasn't until my wife got in a fight with a school board member, and my wife was trying to support before and after school child care, and the school board member didn't think we needed it, thought that mothers should all be home with their kids. And after a discussion with my wife, I ended up running for the school board. Was fortunate enough to be elected, and about halfway through my second term, really fell in love with education. I saw the difference that people were making in kids' lives and the opportunity to make an impact on our society. So I had gone back to school working on my MBA, and I changed the emphasis to school finance and human resources. And at the end of my second term, I stepped down off the board and was fortunate enough to be hired by the school district I was on the board of to run all the support services, and did that for 3 years. Eventually moved to human resources, started working, got my superintendent credentials, worked on my doctorate in education, and then felt that I'd like the opportunity to be able to lead a school district. So I went down to Canby, Oregon for 3 years as superintendent. Got a little bit frustrated with the funding in Oregon, which most Washingtonians don't realize the vast difference there is just crossing the Columbia River.
Yeah, it's a vast difference.
Yeah, huge. And so looked for an opportunity to come back, and I thought with my background and my skill set that I really fit a larger district and a larger system. And I was lucky enough, again, my wife found this job was open as the deputy superintendent with the opportunity to go through a 2.5-year job interview and be able to follow one of the greatest superintendents I've ever had the opportunity to work with.
So you haven't been a teacher then?
My classroom teaching was teaching school finance to administrator candidates at WSU Tri-Cities.
Interesting, awesome. John Deeder, did you have so many educators have a story of a teacher or somebody in their life who really significantly impacted their desire to move into education. I mean, was that kind of your story?
It was mostly, I don't think of one specific person. I think being involved in activities, especially athletics, and the coaches I was around, and the role models that many of them set for me and the people that I got to play with, got me really excited about wanting to do some of those kinds of things for kids. And it's really interesting because some of the role models I had would be people that I would never have cloned, and others were people that I wanted to set my life around. So I had both ends of that, and but both made a difference, because even the ones that you didn't agree with or didn't think you wanted to be like taught you some lessons that I think really helped me over the time.
So, John, with your background in the private sector in mind, I mean, what unique? I mean, you said you worked at Hanford for some time. So, talk about what unique opportunities that brings to the district.
Well, when I talk to students about the value of education, I point out that I have a degree in engineering, I have a degree in business, and I have a degree in education. And I truly believe that as you continue to learn throughout your life, you've got connections in your brain that you create between those pockets of information that allow you to perceive the world differently. And I think one of the things that I bring to the district is the way that I'm able to take a look at problems differently than somebody who may have spent their entire career in education. When I talk about getting outside of the box, a lot of times I like to just throw the box away and let's start with a blank slate and figure out if we could start this from scratch and build something brand new, what would that be? And throughout my career, I've been known for challenging the system. When I was in Oregon, I developed a pretty quick reputation as the superintendent who would stand up and say anything to anybody if it was going to benefit kids. Because as long as my school board agrees philosophically with the fight that I'm fighting, I'm going to step on toes if that's what needs to happen. And to me, it's a privilege to be able to serve a community like this. And Evergreen has such a rich foundation of entrusting the teachers to be the experts in the classroom and to work with the kids. We don't use a prescribed curriculum. We have scope and sequence, so we have those mileposts that we expect teachers to guide their classrooms through and to guide each student through. And what we're working on now is providing them the tools so that they can personalize an experience for students, because they're the ones in the classroom that have those relationships with those kids. And as a system, my goal is to create an organization that supports the student in the classroom in such a way that the district becomes almost transparent, but we have consistency through the structures that we provide.
What have been some of the most significant challenges of the last 11 years?
For me, well, the most significant challenge was the downturn, the economic downturn. You know, in 2008, all of a sudden we were looking at facing $10 to $12 million cuts a year for over a 3-4 year period of time. Ended up being $26.3 million that we cut, and that was very difficult, because you're then dealing with what are you going to offer, what aren't you going to offer, who's going to have a job and who's not going to have a job, and what are your priorities. And I think the priorities turned out to be great, because it was set by the school board and myself, and it was really around keeping teachers in the classroom, making sure that we maintained the buildings, and making sure that we created a safe learning environment for all kids, and making sure that we continued to develop our teachers so that we can continue to have great instruction going on. And with that, obviously, we didn't cut a lot of teachers, but we had to cut other things. We cut 45% of the central office staff at the time. We cut things in technology that John is trying to rebuild now. We cut a lot of curriculum materials. We just didn't have the money to do both, so we made a decision that kids needed their teachers, and teachers are really good at putting together the things that they needed to make that work. And of course, the second biggest challenge was the Crestline fire.
Yeah.
You know, when you're looking at a school building at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you know right then it's gone. There's no saving anything, and you've got 500 kids who don't have a school. You have to decide how you're going to manage that, and that was managed so well by all of the people here. It was just an amazing thing to have kids back in school by Thursday morning when they didn't have a school. And it was really, really a great effort on the part of my team.
Yeah, what year was that?
2013.
Not
Yeah.
long ago.
February of 2013. Super Bowl Sunday of 2013.
You mentioned curriculum, and I was hoping to talk to you a little bit more about that, as you guys are well underway with the 1-to-1 technology ratio, and the school board is slated to adopt a whole slew of curriculum this evening. What was the last time the district adopted new curriculum, and what's changed? I mean, obviously it's digital now.
We've adopted a number of things over the years, but they haven't been as broad of adoptions as we might have made. But we've adopted elementary math, we've adopted some supplemental reading kinds of things, we've adopted a different science program. But the difference now is, as we move to 1-to-1, rather than buying textbooks and those kind of print materials in large quantities, we're trying to do that with digital content, so that the digital content can be updated all the time. A textbook you buy and you keep it for 8-9 years, in the way history is going and the way some of the sciences are going, that can be pretty outdated before you can afford a new one. And I don't think what people understand is when we do an adoption, say we do a math adoption just at the elementary school, we're talking $3 or $4 million. Where the digital curriculum is much less than that and more easily kept up to speed and up to date. And if we're seeing things that we don't particularly think are working for kids, it's easy to plug in something else. And I think it's just going to give kids much more flexibility and teachers much more flexibility on how they address the learning needs of kids.
John, in your time here, what have been some of your proudest moments as superintendent? You kind of touched on some of that already.
Yeah, well, getting Crestline reopened, building Gila was a real proud moment for us because we did it without having to go to the taxpayers and raise taxes, and we did it, I think, in a very efficient and economical way that's going to pay off for the community. And then going over and seeing how much kids are taking advantage of it and the kind of learning experiences they're creating. But I also am really proud of the other work we've done in the community and the number of internships we've built, like the SEH partnership, and now a partnership with Columbia Machine and a partnership with Karcher, where we have kids out there, plus the partnerships we have in the medical field for our Gila kids and other kids in other programs to be out in learning situations beyond the four walls of the classroom. I believe strongly that there's got to be more in the future of our students being out and getting their hands on things, because I think not only does it teach them a skill out there, it teaches them how to work. Those soft skills, you've got to be there on time. You've got to produce when you're there. You've got to do these kind of things. You know, we tell them that all the time in the classroom, but when they go to a job site and they see that's how people work in a job site, it makes a big impression on kids. So that's those things. And most of all, Katie, I got to be honest with you, the biggest accomplishment of my time here has been the people I've hired and the people that are going to be here to carry on the things that we've put in place, because we have great people.
Yeah, you talked about it, the retirement celebration.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so many of the principals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what kinds of things have you looked for? What kinds of qualities have you identified in your principals?
Number one, they care about kids and will build relationships. Number two, they're a great teacher. I don't think you can evaluate and work with teachers if you weren't a great teacher yourself. I don't think you have the credibility to do that. That they care about the community and they reach into the community to make sure they have relationships with parents and the community. I think education is about relationships, so I'm really looking for people who do a great job of building relationships with parents and kids and their teachers.
I know one of the big pushes that Evergreen has made is issues of equity, and I pulled up some OSPI numbers. So in the latest available data, I'm sure this has changed for the 16-17 school year, but in 2015-16, 47% of the district students received free and reduced lunches, and 39.9% of the district students were students of color. Compared that to 10 years ago, 34.9% of the district students had free and reduced lunches. 21.3% of students were students of color. Can you guys talk about the specific work the district has done to achieve equity for students, both in the area of income as well as racial disparities, and what work still needs to be done?
Well, let me start with what work needs to be done. We're never going to get there if we don't laser focus on it. And we take every student and see what their needs are and build a relationship with those kids and those families so we can help them meet those needs. But some of the things we've done. We've opened 14 family and community resource centers. Each one of those has become very popular in the community that it sits in. We have partnerships with SHARE and other organizations to help put backpacks together for kids on weekends. The first thing we want to do is make sure those basic needs, food, clothing, house, are there for a kid. Because if they're not eating and they're not well taken care of, really sitting down in a classroom and trying to be a great student is very hard to do. So we've done those kinds of things. We have, I think we have tried to look at the economics of things for families. And, this last year we decided we would we would buy all the school supplies K through 5. I've had parents tell me that saved them up to $200-300.
I'm sure.
And I've have parents tell me I could buy my kids a new pair of shoes. I've had parents tell me I could pay the light bill that month. Those kind of things make a huge difference in that kid's life and that family's life. We have partnerships with the Vancouver Housing Authority so that if we have people who are homeless, we can work with them to try our best to get these people into suitable housing so their kids have a roof over their head. We also dropped all the athletic and music and kind of user fees at the secondary level. We're now feeding almost 900 kids a day at night their supper before they go home, because by having them stay after school, we instituted 4-day-a-week activity buses. So every Monday through Thursday, kids can get on stay as long as they need to for tutoring, athletics, whatever. Get on a bus, we'll take them home. And as a part of that, we're feeding them. And for some kids, that's the meal they're going to get at night. And of course, we're feeding huge numbers of kids breakfast and lunch because of the free and reduced lunch numbers. And I think I'm really proud of the partnership we built this year with LULAC, and really tried to help LULAC educate their families as to the immigration laws and their immigration status. We had workshops in our community, in our district. We had people come to do the notary of the paperwork, et cetera, in case a parent was picked up and sent back to their home country and their kids ended up staying here. Who was going to take care of the kids? How are we going to work with the kids? I really just believe that what we've tried to do is say every kid counts. And no matter what their environment or situation is, every kid counts. So it's our job to figure out how we're best going to support that kid. And I think that starts with relationships, and I think that starts by being able to say, let us help you with whatever this is. Do you need a pair of shoes? We'll get you a pair of shoes. The other thing that really feeds into that, and I don't want to forget it, is that we have a wonderful faith-based partnership where almost every one of our schools is connected to a faith-based organization in town. And those family and community resource centers, if somebody comes in and they need a pair of shoes, they call the church, and you'd be blown away at how quickly that pair of shoes is sitting on the coordinator's desk so that kid has what they need. It's amazing how generous our community is when they know there's a need, and you tell them what that need is, they fill that need, and our faith-based partnership has just been wonderful in doing that.
Have you guys had incidents of that where you've had students whose parents have been deported? And
my understanding is very little, but we had a couple, 3 right away at Covington Middle School that were deported.
And that was this year?
That was right after President Trump put the order in that was delayed by the court. But they still did some arrests and moving people out before that happened. And a couple of students I know at Covington Middle School had that happen.
What about you, John? What's you down there?
Well, 3 years ago, John and the board started this equity initiative, and it started off with a focus on poverty. And we brought Donna Beagle in and had her speak to all of our staff about the culture of poverty. And that started really in awareness. And out of that, we've eventually turned it from poverty to complete equity. But one of the first things that we started looking at was, with help from the state actually, with their disproportionality data on discipline, is were the discipline policies we had in place actually equitable to all of our kids? Right. So we put together a committee and started taking a look at it and brought back to the board, as part of our complete policy review with the board, a new student discipline policy that's based on restorative practices. And the board excitedly approved that policy, and we're in the process now of developing the implementation procedures. We've been doing training on restorative practices with staff for 2 years now, and trying to build the capacity within the schools. Sorrowfully, it's not something you can just flip a switch and turn on, and if you look at the papers from around the state, other districts are struggling. Highline had some issues. Spokane recently was in the paper this last week with teachers not happy about restorative practices. But from a philosophical perspective, when we suspend a kid, we're telling them we don't want you here. And that's never a message that I want to send to any student. This has to be that welcoming place. These are young people that are still growing. And many of them, if you look at the data, there was a study out of WSU several years ago, in the Spokane School District that looked at ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences, and the impact on academics, attendance, and discipline, that probably 60% of our discipline that we deal with in students, those students are in schools, those students have at least 4, if not 5 or more ACEs in their lives. So they have trauma that they've buried deep within themselves that's coming out in weird ways. And this is what we need to recognize, is they're young people that need to be taught and guided on how do you deal with this trauma and overcome this trauma to become a functional member of society and be able to work through that. And as John said, we've got to create a safe environment first. So we have to make sure they're fed, they have housing, and they have a sense of belonging. Because as you can't get to the point of processing that kind of trauma until you're at the point on that Maslow's hierarchy that all those lower levels are being met. It's really a self-actualization to be able to explore yourself enough to deal with that kind of trauma. You look at adults that go through counseling, and they could spend years in counseling to overcome some of these things. We're asking 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, historically what we've said is shape up and just do it. And the actual cause of their behavior may have absolutely nothing to do with what's happening in the classroom. So we've got implementation guidelines that we've prepared that we're going to be distributing next year. And part of this is just how soon can we get there. So we have some restorative practices happening in the schools. We have many elementary schools that started using the Mind Up training with mindfulness and meditation with our kindergarten, first, and second graders to teach them how to be in control of their emotions and in control of their feelings and not always be in that fight or flight mode. And we have positive behavior intervention systems at many PBIS at many of our schools. We are now going to implement Swiss data tracking, which is a discipline data tracking at all of our schools next year. And we've just started doing a survey of students and teachers on the social emotional learning environment that each of them have. So we're starting to pay a lot more attention to that social emotional element of the whole child, and realizing that until we get those foundational things in place for every children, we're never going to achieve John's BHAG goal of no dropouts.
So what will restorative practices, I mean, you mentioned sort of mindfulness and meditation. What are some of the other examples of what restorative practices
we already have teachers who start the day with restorative circles. So they just have a circle time where students get used to sharing with each other and creating a little bit of a sense of that vulnerability in a safe place, so that when something happens in the classroom, you can have what's referred to as a restorative circle, and the students are used to having those types of discussions of, did you harm someone, how were they harmed, and how do you repair the harm? Instead of it being punitive, how do you make amends for what you've done? Because there's no bad kids, there's just kids that do bad things. And you need to separate the act from the person, and that's what restorative practices are all about. It's a training opportunity or a teaching opportunity, not we need to get back at you for something.
So what kinds of things are you going to be, like what kinds of metrics are you going to be looking for to determine success of these types of programs? Are you looking for decreased discipline rates, more equitable discipline rates? I mean, for what is a mark of success?
There's a lot of ways you can slice this. We're going to be looking at the quantity, the disproportionality. One of the things that we're doing is next week we actually have a workshop with the board. Our board has chosen to adopt coherence governance as a governance model. And in this model, it's similar to policy governance, which most people have never heard of either one of them. Mm-hmm. But they're in the process of developing about 24 policies that are higher policy level guidance than our current policy manual. And those 24 policies define the role of the board and the role of the superintendent. So anything the board says, we're going to retain this right, they retain the right in those policies. If they don't specifically say that the board gets to do it or the superintendent can't do it, they then delegate everything else to me, but I also have the accountability and the responsibility. So next week, we're going to be sitting down and the board's going to define the result, what we call the results policies. So these are the outcomes that they want students in the Evergreen School District to attain. And they will range from math, reading, social studies, science, to discipline, post-school employment opportunities, social emotional learning. And then it's our job to come up with what are those metrics that we're going to be looking at and how are we going to measure our own success. And then I will be reporting that to the board throughout the school year as part of what's called compliance reports in this model. So your question sounds pretty simple right now, but it's really complex. And one of the things I've done organizationally is, rather than hire a deputy superintendent to replace my position, I created a position called the Chief Academic Accountability Officer, and hired Matt Handelman, the former superintendent out of Coeur d'Alene. And his job is going to be looking at those results policies. What assessments do we need, like our social emotional learning surveys, like our Swiss data on discipline, our attendance rates, classroom walkthrough observation data. We adopted iReady as a benchmarking, progress monitoring tool for reading and math. And how do we put all of those together to get a real view of the whole child, to determine, are we meeting the expectations of the board? And that's something that we're going to be developing over the next 12 months.
Cool. So one of the challenges heading into the school year, obviously, was some of the struggles between the teachers union and the administrative office. How do you guys see the administration's relationship with the teachers union moving forward, and what challenges were created as a function of some of that heartburn last August?
Well, I think the association serves a definite role, and there's a check and balance that it creates in the way that we implement change within the school district. And I think to be honest with you, we're still feeling that out. We sort of felt last year that the way the bargain was approached changed the relationship. And it was a struggle last fall. To say anything otherwise would be disingenuous. But we've worked through a lot of that. An example was when we had all those snow days this last year. We had a meeting with myself, the union leadership, and Janae Gomes, our HR director, and we sat in the office for an hour and a half, almost 2 hours, after pre-planning and communicating through email what we were really going to do. And we made sure we dotted every I, crossed every T, and had a plan put together that was in the best interest of students and staff moving forward to get through this school year, in light of missing 8 school days. And to me, that was a good opportunity to repair some relationships. Moving forward, we need to continue to collaborate with them. We need to keep them informed of the things that we're thinking in the way of change, so they can process it and they can get feedback from the membership, and that they can adequately and appropriately represent their membership.
I think we have always had really good relationships with our teachers. We care about our teachers. Our teachers, in my mind, are some of the best anywhere. The relationship is with the teacher union leaders. And the teacher union leaders change the relationship by the way they approach the bargain. And that's the way it is. That's their choice. We can't control their choices. All we can do is control our reaction and our response to those choices. They wanted to change the relationship. They were very successful at it. But the bottom line is, we're going to have to work together for the rest of the time Evergreen School District exists, and we have to find ways to do that. And in my time here, the relationship between EEA and the district was always really good. My relationship with Gloria Smith, the previous president, was wonderful. We got through the relationship with Dave Burrows before that. Jim Schaefer before that was great. It really depends on the leadership and what they bring to the table and how reasonable they are to work with us. But I would say this, teachers in this district are well taken care of. Mm-hmm. And the relationship that I have with the teachers in this district, and I'm talking the teachers in the classrooms that I go into, have always been really healthy, and they'll continue to be healthy. With John, it's a matter of what's the political side and what's WA want and are beating on people to get, versus how are we treating people, and we're treating people really well, and always will.
I think I would add that I just got done going around and meeting with every single one of the principals, because coming in as new superintendent, I felt it was important for me to give them some of my non-negotiables on what do I expect of them as leaders. And number one is, I told them I need an organization that's built upon respect, and that teachers ought to feel free to come to their principal, come to the superintendent, to the curriculum director, the technology director, the maintenance director. They ought to feel comfortable going directly to the person who has the answer to the issue they have. They shouldn't feel like they need an intermediary to have a discussion with us. And that's why I've worked hard for the last 3 years to try to make myself approachable to teachers, to establish communication channels as best you can. In a district this size, it's pretty difficult. My hat's off to John. He has done such an amazing job in his tenure here of knowing, from my perspective, he knows every teacher, knows about them, their family, where they went to school, half of where their relatives work. It's amazing to go into a school with him, and I just hope to be able to follow in those footsteps.
So the district, speaking about kind of the political nature of things, so obviously the legislator, as a time of this conversation, I mean, they're still gridlocked on McCleary. Talk about the challenges that's created this year, and what do you guys feel needs to happen in Olympia to provide for students?
Well, the challenges are that we don't have a budget right now going into the next year. And if June 30th comes and goes, it's an unknown whether schools are essential services or they're not essential services. And do we close or do we stay open? Those are issues that only the legislature can solve for us. I will say this to you. The 9 legislators in this region, I would say to you, 7 or 8 of them have been very open to meeting with us, talking with us, learning from us, and trying to support what we want to do. And I'll also say this, that we do that on a regular basis, and we are almost always lockstep with the Vancouver School District in what we're saying and asking for, and building a partnership to make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes as we're trying to convince legislatures to take action. With Paul Harris and Ann Rivers on the negotiations for the McCleary solution, they have been wonderful. We can reach out to them at any time. I think it's a philosophical difference between the Republicans and the Democrats. I think it's around money, and I get that. But for me, what they need to do is find a solution that satisfies the court and put a solution in place so we're not arguing about McCleary 5 years down the road. It's done, and we're moving on to what's the best thing we can do to meet the needs of the students. But I don't know if that's going to happen, Katie, to be honest with you. I mean, we're right up against June 30th, and we're still not hearing a lot. I saw the forecast today. There's a little more money, but when you're talking in a $35 billion budget, $84 million, you're talking about.
It's a drop in the bucket.
It's a pocket change for those guys when it really gets down to it. So
pays the fine from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, maybe. But I do believe this. I believe no matter which party is there, I don't working on it, they really both want to solve the problem. But it all comes down to how they approach whether they're going to change the taxing system, change the levy system, put bumpers around bargaining. Because until there's something around bargaining, there's really nothing that they don't have enough money to fix McCleary without some constraints on salary and benefits.
I think my biggest concern right now is I'm looking ahead at August 1st, taking over the district, and potentially I see 3 different ways that our district could start on strike in my first month as superintendent. And it's scary. And it all lies in the hands of the legislature. I mean, they can either eliminate bargaining to where WA calls a statewide strike, and you've already seen they've taken votes in other districts, and we've gotten indications our union's going to follow suit. Our union leadership is going to follow suit. They could put us in a situation where we have to go back to the bargaining table over how our TRI is defined. And after last summer, it could be difficult to reach an agreement on that. Or they could do not enough, and WEA could tell every district in the state to go out on strike. And I'm looking at those 3 possibilities, hoping that it's somewhere that doesn't happen in that. And in the meantime, once we do get a budget number, I've got, John and I have a list of items that have been submitted that people want included in the budget that we're still have on hold, which is going to push us out, that some of these are going to cause hiring, potentially could cause hiring, that could cause dominoes. And now, thanks to the state legislature, we're going to be hiring teachers on the first day of school. potentially. Those are the concerns I have. Is to it's a delay to them, it's reality to us, and it impacts kids.
Mm-hmm. I agree 100% with that.
And then just one last kind of policy question. So the district has signaled that it's gearing up for a bond measure. Talk about the district's facilities needs and what can voters expect.
Well, I can talk about, we went out for a bond in 2008. The last one we passed was 2002. And we went out in 2008, we were soundly defeated. Think about the economy in 2008. It was just bad timing on our part. But we made a decision at that point in time that the district patrons didn't have an appetite for any more taxes. So we put together a capital improvement program to keep everything moving forward. We've replaced HVAC systems. We've done a lot of things. But the bottom line is we've got many, many schools that are 40 to 50 years plus in age. They're costing a lot of money to operate. And our hope is that our voters will support us as we go for a new bond. And the board's got a decision to make. We can go for a bond that would get a good chunk of the work done without raising taxes because we're paying off the old bonds. Or we could go for a bond of a little bigger and do more. And that's a decision the board has to make. But it is really time in this system for us to upgrade the facilities, not only from a technology perspective, but from that whole energy perspective and from the perspective of creating the right kinds of learning environments, because the learning environment has changed significantly in the last 20 years, especially when you're a workshop district and especially when you're trying to personalize. And I'm confident that people in our community will see that it's time, but we have a lot of work to do to get there.
In addition to those buildings, we have over 470 classrooms and portables across this district. And if you looked at the capacity we have in portables, it would be, I think it's one of the top 25 largest school districts in the state, just in portables in Evergreen. And those portables weren't built to last more than 20 years. And we have portables from the 80s and 90s that are near end of life. So part of what we're looking at in the bond is how do we replace those, especially at the schools that won't be replaced. Because we have some smaller elementary schools that have portables, and if we replaced them, we would very likely have enough square footage to eliminate the portables. But we have schools that were built, in the early 2000s or in the 90s that wouldn't be on this list. And Heritage High School is a perfect example. It was built as a 10 through 12 campus, and due to growth had to open as a 9 through 12 campus, and has had portables there since the day it opened. And we could add a classroom wing, and you think about portables, and it's not just the energy inefficiency, it's not just the deterioration because they weren't built to last that long, but with the safety concerns and considerations that we have in today's society, portables aren't the best solution. And it would be nice to have an enclosed campus that you could lock down and you could move in within the campus and not have all of these students going in and out and all these hiding places and alleyways between the portables. So that's another thing that we're putting in there is some safety improvements in the portable replacement. It's on the draft that we're going to be sharing with the board tonight to get their feedback. The goal is to have the plan outlined and pretty much scoped out by early fall, share it with the community, get some feedback, and then we'll pick a date for the bond measure and get the resolution before the board next fall.
So what advice do you have for it?
It's hard for me to give John advice. The bottom line is he's really good, and I'm so happy that he's going to be the person who succeeds me. We have some great things going on in this system. He knows what they are. He knows that it's important that we keep some of them. He also knows it's important that every one of them be improved upon, and that continuous improvement concept. Mm-hmm. And John brings that to the system, and he's helped us over the last 3 years get where we're at, and he's going to continue to move us forward. I'm pretty excited about leaving and giving it to somebody that I know is going to take us forward.
And you're staying in the area.
Oh
right?
yes,
Okay.
I live a mile from here, and I'm staying there.
And you've talked about doing a little bit of traveling.
We're going to do some traveling. I'm on a number of boards in the community that I plan to stay with. I'm on the Boys and Girls Club board. I'm on the board of the Historic Trust. I'm the chairman of the PIC board, and I'm on the Columbia River Mental Health Board, as well as a little high-tech company in Camus's board. All of those are very high interest of mine, and a place where I think I can continue to give back to the community. So I'm going to stay there as long as they'll let me, and try to give back to the community that way. And yeah, I'm going to do some traveling. I mean, my wife and I are pretty excited about seeing some things in the world that we haven't ever seen, but I'm not the kind of guy who's going to be gone all the time. I would go crazy.
What's the first trip for you guys? Do you know yet?
Well, I know the first trip for me, I'm leaving my wife home, which is it's kind of stupid, but it's the way it is. My son and I are going to the Baseball Hall of Fame induction ceremony in Cooperstown.
Oh, that'll be cool.
And then we're going to go over, drive to the East Coast and see the Yankees and the Red Sox and the Mets and the Orioles and some teams. So
that'll be awesome.
We're doing that, actually leaving on the 29th of July and coming back the 5th or 6th of August.
Wow. Very cool. Awesome. Well, is there anything I didn't ask you guys that I should, or any other parting thoughts here, or?
This is the best community I've ever lived in, Katie. They support their schools, and they support the kids. I think anybody who moves into this community has selected a great place to live with a great school system, no matter what school system in Southwest Washington they go to. And we criticize our legislature because of the lack of action. I worked on the other side of the river for 33 years. People over here don't understand how well off we are in many ways.
Awesome. Great. Well,
I would just add that it's a privilege and an honor to be entrusted and be able to support the students, the community, the staff, the parents of this school district. And I got to say a few words last night at our staff reception for John, and the word I shared with John is coach, and it's the word that I will always think of him. He set the vision for the district. He created strategic plans. He picked the players, the principals, the administration, and he decides who plays, and he's at the point now that, like every coach, you got to let the team go out on the court and play the game. And it's been a privilege for 3 years to be able to work with John and to learn from him, learn the culture of this district, and be able to build upon the outstanding foundation and structures that he's put in place.